mean, for me, I like the way that that table is, so you can see it just in one list, everything that we have the ability to do a standard modification for. The way it was written was being taken out, so then you're putting things that are, so I just like that one list, which is a list of, what, 50 things? So I'm proposing to keep it back, or put things back in there so that there's one place you can find any standards modifications in. Yeah, yeah.
Christina, we ready to go? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'd like to call the August 25th, 2026 Planning Commission meeting to order. We'll start with roll call. Stephen Blagden.
Here.
Laura Hess.
Here.
Rick Brooks.
Here.
Jim Lucas.
Here.
Peter Espinosa, absent. and the Chair, Ray Fernandez, is here. Would you stand for the flag salute? Mr. Lucas, would you lead us in the flag salute?
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Christina, do we have any public comment cards? Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the consent calendar. Item number 5, it's the minutes of the July 28th meeting. Have you had a chance to review the minutes and any comments or things that should be changed? Mr. Blagden?
Just a question on number 7 for Rafferty, if you'd had a chance to talk to Citizen Serve.
Yes, I'm getting a meeting on the books for me to be able to look through and ask some of the questions, and then we'll look at a date for the commission after we're able to talk with them. But
Thanks.
Excuse me. That was a question I also had. I was hoping we could add something today. But, okay. Any other comments, questions? Like a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
We'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Blagden?
Yes.
Ms. Lucas?
Yes.
Mr. Brooks?
Yes.
And Mrs. Hess?
Yes.
And I vote yes, approved, 5-0. And let's go to item 6, the Community Development Department status report for August. We'll have a staff report from our city manager.
thank you, Chair and Planning Commissioners. The community development report for July has been submitted. So in the month of July, we issued 18 building permits. We had 2 code enforcement cases submitted. There's 19 active cases, no closed cases. We had no stop work orders issued. We have 47 unpermitted construction cases active and 4 that were closed. We took in 5 development applications for a total of 61 projects under review and approved 4 projects. If you have any questions about them, I'm happy to answer for you.
Comments or questions? Mr. Blagden?
Thank you. The fees, when are the new fees coming in?
Angie and myself are still, we have the final fee study from our consultant. We're still looking through them. We haven't finished looking through them to finalize everything to be able to bring it to council and get them adopted.
That was approved about 2 years ago to do, so depending upon when he actually did the study, they could be stale before we get them.
It took a little while for us to be able to do the time motion study of it, so that was done not that long ago.
Okay.
For that part of it, which is good.
Then there was, for about 9 years, 2020, LaFleur was on the CDD reports, code enforcement. And then in 2022, it got red tagged. Oh, I see the chair has
Cheers, yeah, passing them out.
it on there. Has anything happened since?
Nothing has happened since then. The last real contact we had with that property owner was back in 2020. At that time, it was council's direction for us to file notices of substandard on the property. So that house has been red tagged. There's a substandard filed on the property, and then we closed it off the code enforcement list.
So nobody's living there?
No one's living in the property. The patio, the main issue in that one is the deck on the back of the house. The supports for it started to buckle, and were failing. And at one point in time, it's been ongoing since 2013. At one point in time, there was a plan for them to make the repairs that was approved and permits issued, but that was back in 2015 timeframe. And the owner never moved forward at that time and has never made the changes or repairs to lift the substandard.
All right, then the one I ask about every so often, El Travicia, the wall and stuff?
Actually, earlier this month, we met with the designer and contractor about the wall. So we started looking looking to try to move the wall back and eliminate it and get it to work. So we met with them, Elizabeth and myself both met with the contractor and a new architect designer for the wall to kind of walk through what has been come to the commission, and they're preparing a new plan for it and trying to pull it back off the property line, and also showed them some stuff where a portion of those walls are actually on the neighbor's property, so they need to remove them off the neighbor's property as well.
So is it likely to come soon? Because my thought was if we can agendize it, maybe that'll spur them to move.
They said they'll be back in like 2 months with plans, so hopefully we'll actually see something come of it.
Just driving by today, I see they're parking on the edge where it's not stable.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I noticed there's no code violations in July.
Yeah, we didn't issue any stop work orders in July for those.
Summer break for the code violators.
We have issued a few already this month. So.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments? Well, I have a couple of comments. The photos I sent you, these are two properties that have bothered me for a long time. And I took a picture, and our city manager and I had a meeting before, and he gave me the files on it, so I'm very familiar with it, and I'm satisfied with his answer, especially 2020 LaFleur. As you can see that I saw the plans for it. They put up 10 steel posts to hold up the deck. I was just concerned that if that deck fell, a downhill property could be affected, but there's really nothing below it in case it did fall. It's just, to me, it's kind of sad. It's a beautiful house, and that they can't get it fixed. And I guess you can't get a loan because it's been red tagged and that kind of thing. So it's just, from the street, it doesn't look bad, so it's not a real eyesore to the community, but I was just always wondered what happened with this property, and so my questions were answered this afternoon. The other one I want to show you is 838 Picacho. I used to live down the street at my son's house when we were remodeling our house, and I saw this house being built, and I'm just, to be honest, a little appalled that there's no landscaping in the whole back of this property. So I was trying to get the conditions of approval. I did go online, and it was issued a certificate of occupancy, but I can't tell who issued it. And the files, Mr. Woolridge, kind of lost in the transition of building City Hall. So I wanted to see the conditions of approval or the landscape plan, but I wasn't able to. And the example I want to make is that, you know, new applicants have to just meet every letter of the code, our landscaping code, and screening, and meet the fire department codes. But then somebody got away with something this bad. And I just wonder, you know, in a big, big rainstorm, what can happen? I mean, it's withstood rain, so it's probably okay, but it's just, to me, this is a little bit of an eyesore if you're driving on LaFleur, because then you're looking at the whole back of this property. So I don't know at this point what can be done. This is way before our city manager's time. And maybe, I don't know, that's a battle he might not want to pick. But on the positive side, the hill behind it, that's a infamous property where that's the one that had all the railroad ties. Somebody tried to build a big house, a lot of community opposition, so it's getting cleaned up, and it looks like they're going to put sprinklers, and they're going to put ground cover and everything. So that's good.
Yep.
So
People in the neighborhood were upset with that 838 Picacho at the time for no landscaping, because we're supposed to have landscaping. And I thought if the people, I mean, that's kind of like a permanent requirement that if that doesn't have landscaping, you could go in and say, hey, this is supposed to be landscaped. Another one like this is 1800 Dorothea, which is another downslope house, and it's just barren, and that wasn't finished that long ago.
It's one of the ones where we always kind of talk about, like, can we go back in and probably require them to do something? We probably could take the time and go through the process and force them to reinstall some landscaping of it. I've never talked to the one on Picacho. I don't have any experience with it. It was, I think, approved in the, mid to early 2000s, like 04, 05 timeframe, and was built in the, like 08, 09 when it was completed, I think, timeframe. So I don't know if there ever was like landscaping actually installed when it went through the original construction process or not, but there are those things where we could go back and force them. I know we've talked about making people record landscape plans against the property. Actually running into a bit of an issue with that right now with the one on Canola and the county not wanting to record it against the property. So we're trying to work through those issues. At the
Why?
moment. Because they don't know what to do with it. So they've actually kicked them to like the land mapping division of Public Works. And then they don't know what to do with it because they're used to looking at like survey work. So they're the ones that review. When you have a survey done, they'll review the survey before it gets recorded. And it's not necessarily a survey, but it is kind of a survey. So it's just, I think, it's not something they've ever done or seen. So there's one of those things of trying to figure out how to get it recorded. So we're trying to work through those issues with the county and the recorder's office right now to get it recorded.
No, I thought they're just supposed to record what you give them. They just say, $25, please.
No, we've
And then they just scan it and file it.
No, we've run into some issues with it, so we're trying to work through those right now with the applicant.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, well, if there are no other comments, we'll receive and file. That'll be the end of the consent calendar. Let's move on to administrative items. Number 7 is review of limits on square footage of structures, continued from July 28th. I'm going to ask for a staff report, but before we go to you, just a quick little review. I think I first brought this up in May. We talked about it, and I asked Ms. Hess if she would do amend the code so we could look at it, and she did that, and thank you for that. And then I also we were trying to address Mr. Lucas's concerns, and then Mr. Lucas has come up with his own revisions, and he's going off of what you did. So it's kind of collaboration, but very independent of each other. We want to make sure there's no, Brown Act type of violations. And I just want to say that when I first started with this, I wanted something very simple, increase the structural footprint from 7,500 to 9,000, increase the limits administratively and of the Planning Commission. So it's become something more than that, and I think it's pretty good. So what I would like to do for the purpose of this discussion, we'll have a staff report, and then I'll have Mr. Lucas. We're going to review what he did, which I think is very good, but I want to stop the meeting for a few minutes so we can all have time to read it, and then we can discuss it, and hopefully we'll get some kind of consensus and come up with something that we can forward to the City Council. I'm not big on prolonging things month after month. That just kind of drives me nuts. So hopefully we can get some kind of agreement today. So with that, could we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair and Planning Commission. And like I said, at our last meeting, we looked at a draft of a code amendment language related to square footage and structural footprint size. And through that discussion, there were some ideas about some potential limitations on the actual size. So we looked at a little bit closer of what is appropriate to be approved at a like administrative level, at a staff level, versus having to go to the Planning Commission and not basically having the administrative approval process allow for very, 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 very large houses and put a limitation onto what we could approve at a staff level. So those houses that would be larger would come to the commission for review and approval is one of the concepts we were kind of looking at it. So in the draft code language that you have here, you can kind of see that in there. There's some sections that are sort of split out. It has an administrative approval that we could limit, that we could do at staff level, and what could be approved at the planning commission level. And it also looks at your aspects of structural footprint and doing an increase of that. So we footprint limit to trigger standards modification, moving it from 1,500 square feet up to 3,500 square feet. Also a revision to Exhibit 721, which is our square footage calculator that shows the calculation based for the size of the property, being able to allow for the maximum amount of square footage. And a little change to that, based off of property areas and things, it also allows for a greater planning commission approval. So the limitations at planning commission is greater than what it was previously. It allows for an additional 4,500 square feet of like gross floor area beyond what the limitation is and above what staff would be able to approve. It caps staff at like 1,000 square feet additional above a 6,000 square foot limit. Is kind of the way it was worked into it. And that's kind of where we left off and made our adjustments to it at our last meeting. And I know the commission has kind of looked at it, and Mr. Lucas has a couple of ideas and tweaks that he may propose as part of the review tonight.
Okay, any questions of staff before we move on? Okay, so then I've been working with Mr. Lucas a little bit back and forth on putting something together that easy to understand and that we could forward to the city council, assuming we so vote. So let's just take a few minutes, and maybe before we read it, can you kind of give us a little quick synopsis of what to look for here?
Sure. So I think, in the last meeting we had, Commissioner Bland and I had a concern that, just using like the 9,000 square foot kind of total footage for all structures, allowed a pretty big home to be built without having to go to the planning commission. And so, looking at using developing a limit on the primary structure, which is the living space only, that works together with the structural footprint and the aggregate structural footprint. So all these things combined can provide a reasonable type of policy or rules for developers to follow, so they can purchase land and feel confident that they can build a house of adequate size without taking the risks that they may not get a standards modification approved. You don't want to spend $1 million for land. You see some of these requirements and say you want to build a 5,000 square foot house or 6,000 square foot house, but you see the existing, standards modification for the structural footprint is 3,500 square feet. You're taking a risk, right? You're hoping that you'll get a modification through the process, even though Rafferty says, not a big deal. I mean, you're very trustworthy and so on, but you never know. It's a financial risk. So the goal of this was to create something that, using these three kind of areas, again, the structural footprint, the aggregate structural footprint, and what's called the primary structure floor area, using all three of these to have a reasonable type of footprint policy for this section. And I think this kind of achieves that. And then once you go through it, we can go through this flow chart. I think that at a high level, we'll give the scenarios and see if everyone agrees that it's reasonable. I think that's probably the first start, because, again, thanks, Vice Chair Hess, for putting this together, the draft. And there's a lot of language to it. There's a lot of, legal, kind of terms, definitions. But I think just foundationally, this flow chart can kind of set the foundation for the square footages to see if we all think it makes sense on these figures. So.
It may be, instead of us reading all individually, would you like to just kind of walk us through? It might be better if you just go item by item and then we'll have a discussion about it afterwards. You want to do that?
Sure, how about we'll start with go ahead, Stephen.
I'd like to read it. I mean, I spent a lot of time reading and preparing for what we got in the agenda report. So are we using, and thanks to Jim for doing this, I know it's a lot of work. Are we using what's in the agenda packet as a base for our discussion, or is that now tossed aside and this is the basis for discussion?
No, we're going to use what Mr. Lucas did over and above what Ms. Hess did. So
I was just trying to incorporate changes that Mr. Lucas had suggested that he wanted from the last meeting. So if he has a new proposal, then that's fine with me. It's not my baby. It's just something that I was trying to
I just
describe
meant
for, essentially.
I was ready to talk about this, and now he's something different.
well, we're kind of on the third leg of this, you could say. It was the first one that I proposed, and then we made some changes at the meeting. And then Ms. Hess incorporated what we thought that Mr. Lucas was after and what you were after. And then in talking to Mr. Lucas, he had some ideas too. And I said, well, why don't you put your ideas together and we can compare them. But at this point, we could look at what's in the binder, but I think what's been revised captures more of what you wanted and what he wanted. And like Laura says, it's not really her baby. And I appreciate what she did, but I think we have a nice, clean version now that we can go over. I don't really think it's necessary to go back to the one in the binder because that's kind of outdated and replaced by what Mr. Lucas has done. So if you'd be kind enough to kind of walk us through it.
Sure, I propose to start with the flow chart. I think that will just give a high-level kind of illustration of how this whole kind of section would work. So, we'll start at the start, kind of blue button up there. And so let's say you recently bought some property and you want to build a home. And the first question is the structural footprint greater than 5,000 square feet? All right, so if the answer is no, then you would not need a standards modification under the structural footprint bucket. Okay, so see that arrow on the left going to decision box D2. So now the question is, okay, well, for the home you're going to build, is the primary structure floor area, which is living space only, so it would not include the garage, and that details in the actual document, is that larger than 6,500 square feet? And if the answer is no, so now you wouldn't need a standards modification for the structural footprint. You would not need one for the primary structure floor area. And then we go to, I think, what was in the previous version about the aggregate structural footprint. So now between your primary structure, say you had some type of barn or something else, some other structures, is the total aggregate structural footprint more than 9,000 square feet? If the answer is no, then you would not need any standards modification in that scenario. So if your footprint's less than 5,000 feet, your living floor area is less than 6,500 square feet, and your aggregate structural footprint is less than 9,000, then you would not need any type of standards modification. And I think that's, if you look at the 26, and this is from the the spreadsheet of the 26 homes that were handed out last time. So if you looked at that, all those require the standards modification, right? Because the 1,500 square foot structural limit. If you just take into account these first two limits, so if you set the structural footprint at 5,000 square feet, and you set the primary structure floor area to 6,500 square feet, then only 14 of the 29 would then have to have a standards modification based on one of those criteria. So the 15 of the 29, 15 of these would not have needed a standards modification under this requirement because the homes are relatively smaller, they don't have a large footprint, they're less than 6,500 square feet. So under those two criteria, that's the situation. All right, so let's go back to the flow chart and at the top. So let's say the structural footprint is greater than 5,000 square feet. then in that case, that would trigger a standards modification for the structural footprint, and that's administrative, that would be under city staff. And then, so in that case, you have one standards modification that's open. Now the question is, okay, is the primary structure floor area greater than 6,500 square feet? If the answer is no, then you go down that same process flow where you would not need a primary structure floor area of standards modification. And then it goes down to the aggregate structural footprint in that same scenario too. So in this case, if your structure was more than 6,500 square feet, then city staff would have the ability to approve a standards modification up to 7,500 square feet. So that would be their max that they can approve. If it's greater than that, then it would go to the Planning Commission. So the answer is yes, it goes to decision box D4. And in that case, Planning Commission, we have the ability to approve up to 12,500 square feet for the primary structure floor area. And then for some reason, if the builder or owner wanted to get beyond that, there is a variance. So that's in the existing language. It says a variance would be required for anything above that. I kept it in there in case for some reason, you never know, there could be some situation that requires it. So that's kind of where that is there. So that's kind of where you stand there. Now, again, let's go back to box D3, for example, and even D4, right? So once you get to these certain points of these decision trees, and whether the standards modification is done by city staff or by the Planning Commission, then you still have to go through the kind of decision tree for the aggregate structural footprint, boxes D5, D6, and D7. So again, that gets back to, are all the footprints of all the buildings on site, the primary structure and all the accessory units, is that above 9,000 square feet? City staff would have the ability to approve a standards modification up to 11,000 square feet, and then the Planning Commission would have the ability to approve anything up to 14,000 square feet. So these boxes D5, D6, D7, these mimic what was proposed originally by what we saw a month ago. So none of this has changed as far as those numbers. The 9,000, 11,000, 14,000, that is exactly the same as the initial draft of this write-up.
Can I ask you something real quick? Maybe
Sure.
I'm missing it. I don't see where, okay, what's administrative, what's planning commission? Okay, I see it's in the highlighted boxes right in the middle, right? Like what's like a pinkish color?
Yeah, so
So
the
that's
two
your-
administrative, they're the lighter, so the lighter kind of orange and the lighter green, those are both the administrative modifications. The darker orange and the darker green, again, those are standard modifications that are Planning Commission. So I try to color it based on, type of modification required, and then the darker color would be Planning Commission, lighter color is city staff.
Okay, and how does this take into account for a lot that's greater than 1 acre? That would just be the additional 4,500 square feet, we just tack it on.
Yeah, if you go into, the exhibit 721, then yeah, you have, the certain factors. So, again, I didn't modify what was proposed previously, that for greater than an acre, the aggregate structural footprint, it's 11,000 square feet, plus the total acres minus 1 times 4,500. So that wasn't changed at all either. And there's also a formula for the primary structural floor area, that mimics what's in today's policy. It's basically, the total acres minus 1 times 1,500. So again, the goal was to use these kind of 3 footprint square footages to come up with something that, again, like a lot of folks would believe is reasonable to have built without the standards modification. And these things that are much greater, these 8,000 square foot homes, 9,000, they would still go through, Planning Commission, most likely Planning Commission approval for that standards modification.
Okay, and then we have the red line version of section 17.18.040, and then we have the clean copy. These were both provided by yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what's the pleasure of the commission? You want to take some time to read the whole thing?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
The blue sections over here that say variance required, I don't think that we currently have any kind of a mechanism by which people can request additional square footage or structural footprint above what the Planning Commission can grant. Is that correct, Rafferty?
I believe the code does allow for like people to apply for a variance. Typically, when you go for a variance, it means that there is something unique about the property that would prevent you from doing something similarly situated to it. Is typically what a variance process would be for.
But not for just because I want a bigger house.
It gets a little harder when you just want a bigger house. It'd be
Okay.
my lot has a weird, strange characteristic that prevents me from doing something greater on it.
I think we should probably articulate that in the code just so there's no misunderstanding that you can get greater than the allowances here if you go through this process, because that's not really what a variance is for.
Variances are always hard, and then variances usually rely on a weird characteristic of a property, and here every property is different, so every property has its own unique quirk or characteristic that's not dissimilar from, it's like if you live in a grid city and you got a triangular lot, then you're a little different than everybody else, but here everybody's lot's a little different configuration.
Yeah, variances are difficult to impossible generally.
Yes, I think section 7.19.70 variances kind of covers a lot of that detail as far as requesting a variance in today's code.
Okay, so why don't we take a couple of minutes and just read this section 7.18, because I haven't seen a clean copy. I've always seen the red line, so let's just review that and then we'll discuss it, okay?
Yeah, I had given this
Yeah,
definition.
and the definitions too.
Yeah, because there is, I don't see that you put one in, Jim, gross floor area definition.
Yeah, I used Vice Chair Hess's she had a section of a couple definitions, so I added some things in there. It's in section section 3 on the clean copy, definitions for application of limits. There's a couple definitions in there. Like primary structure is defined, floor area is defined, and structural footprints is defined.
Yeah, that's not, I don't want to make that. Floor area is an livable area. That's a different definition. Maybe you want to use it here. But livable areas was something we use in ADUs. What I did was I went through the code and got various definitions that already exist. Floor area ratio, living area, but none of them was complete. So I combined them to get a gross floor area definition. But livable area is different than floor area.
Yeah, I didn't like the floor area definition because it refers to this code. And so it's out of our control, right? If the code changes, then our definition changes, which affects all the stuff in our policies. So that's why I like Vice Chair Hess's language where some of these definitions just apply to this section so that we can make sure it's tailored towards what we're trying to get to, right? I know it's not the best thing, but again, if you look at floor area, the way it's currently defined, it doesn't even really work within what we're trying to do, right? It's referring to a section that's not applicable to a primary structure, for example.
Yeah, that's the one that started with 6 is a state code.
Yeah.
So that's why I didn't make any reference to the state code. This is just a clean definition. All right.
Well, let's,
And last thing, the reason I use living kind of space is because in this spreadsheet, there's a column for living square footage, right? So I wanted to use historical information to kind of figure out, based on historical information, kind of what is the living square footage that we've seen over the last 15 years of homes and kind of, what makes sense.
Where did that come from, living square footage? Because that's, I don't think, in the code.
So when we talk square footage for like structural square footage, we include everything, even non-habitable. So like garage area. So a lot of times those numbers came out of our decision reports, where in there I sort of break down the livable square footage, the non-livable, so any sort of garage, storage, mechanical space, because that all calculates towards that total square footage limit as we apply it today. So that's why you have in that spreadsheet, there's a total square footage and then a living square footage. So you can sort of see how much of the house is actual living space and the rest of it is going to be like garage. Like last time we saw the like 5,000 square foot garage. So you can kind of see what is non-habitable versus habitable that's being approved.
So in your living square feet, does that include like closets and stuff?
Yeah.
All right, so that isn't the,
Everything that's sort of in the habitable space of the house.
Yeah,
All
that's
right, so that's
conditioned
the-
space inside a house, a closet.
so that's the floor area of the house, not the more narrowed down living space.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if we can just take a few minutes to read this, and we'll discuss it after you read it and the definitions. What's that? No, we're just,
Oh, yeah, an intermission. It should take
all
an
right, well,
intermission.
let's just do, I guess, what, a 5-minute intermission.
Yeah, longer than that.
You need more than 5 minutes to read this?
Well, I can read it in 5 minutes, but
To think about it.
yeah.
All right, well, let's take 10-minute intermission. How's that? All right, we'll continue the meeting back in session. So we'll start some comments. I'm going to skip Mr. Lucas since you already told us about it. Mr. Brooks, what's your feeling?
Thank you, Chair. This is a tough one because when it was originally proposed, I was very, in my mind, supportive of it. And while I think that people should be able to build what they want to build on their property, and I don't have a problem with big houses, but I'm kind of torn because now that I look at this, there's a project that I'm aware of that is going to have a major impact on 4 or maybe 5 neighbors. And that project, I felt, should go before the Planning Commission. And under this scenario, it wouldn't. And so I'm really torn on this. When we're talking about primary structure floor area, does that include ADUs and JADUs?
No, it's just the primary structure, just the main unit.
So then I would probably vote no on this as it's proposed. I would consider maybe if on your flow chart here, deciphering that when the primary structure floor area is, you know, at the 7,500 square foot level, that it got a standards modification from the Planning Commission and not administrative. I would probably lean more towards that. But I'm concerned. Honestly, I'll just come right out and say it. I'm concerned because I don't have a lot of faith in city staff. You know, I didn't even get an email that said that we were going to have a meeting tonight. So while I want people to be able to build what they want to build, I have no confidence in the city and the city staff and the city council that run the city. And I kind of feel like the Planning Commission is something that helps try to balance what people want and what the and what the general plan grand design was. While I do feel the general plan needs to be revamped, there's a lot of things in the city that I feel like it needs to be revamped, and so I'm just really torn. But I honestly can't say, after sitting on this planning commission for I don't know how many years now, 5, 6, 7, that these numbers are numbers that I would agree with. When we originally started talking, I didn't maybe realize that it was going to come out to be these kind of numbers. So anyway, so that's my concern, is that this making the primary structure just for the house, with the way the state has said you can build an ADU. Right now they say it's 800 square feet. Next year it might be 2 ADUs. You know, it might be you could build a JADU and an ADU and turn a single family property into a 3-family property, and there's nothing that city staff is going to be able to do about it. And so having the ability to utilize the standards modification to help keep projects within the scope of the general plan, meeting the conditions of approval for a standards modification, falls back onto the Planning Commission. And I've argued that those conditions of approval or, you know, the findings that you have to meet is really what I want to say. The findings are so vague and ambiguous that in 90% of the cases, they could go either way, but that also gives the planning commission the ability to be able to say, okay, well, we can't do anything about the 3 ADUs that you're going to put on, but that doesn't mean that we have to give you the extra, you know, large house to go with it. We can't do anything about the JADUs, but you know, but that doesn't mean that they should be able to build a 2-story house right at 30 feet or 35 feet and have these other things come into play. And I think it's a real concern with how this state disrespects the cities and what they're trying to do. I look at Fullerton and the number of units they've piled in, and right here on Whittier Boulevard, the number of units that they're piling in, and the traffic, you know, like, I know there was an issue last night with traffic, but for me to spend, you know, over 25 minutes to get from Whittier Boulevard to Skyline is just ridiculous. So anyway, at this point, I would try to make this 7,500 square feet include ADUs and JADUs, because it's living space, regardless of who's living in it. And I would want at that level to be planning commission level and not administrative. So I'm sorry that's kind of how I feel about it, and I know that you guys want to get this approved, and I want to get it approved, and I want to see it go down the road. But in all good faith and what I see happening, I feel like that's what we should consider. So those are my comments, and those are the issues that I see with this.
Okay, so you're basically bringing up two different issues, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're concerned if we were to approve, let's say, a house 7,500 square feet, at a later date, somebody could build an ADU, or maybe two, who knows where the law's
They
heading,
could
or
add on a
junior
JADU and an
ADU.
ADU, and there's nothing you can do about it.
So even if we change the definition of the primary structure floor area to include ADUs, what would, and that's what we did now, what would stop somebody 2 years from now bringing in a plan to add an ADU? I don't know, Rafferty, would the staff be able to tell an applicant for an ADU, we've hit the 7,500 square foot that was approved originally, so you can't do an ADU, or your ADU has to come before the planning commission to increase the floor area? Which way would that play out?
So because ADU law is state law, we're bound to allow what our allowable area is. So even if they're maxed out, you can still have an ADU and a JADU because that's what the state requires us to do.
Okay, so to perfectly understand, let's say 7,500 square feet was a maximum, and they're already at that. Somebody comes in and wants to build a 1,000 square foot ADU, you cannot say to them, no, the property's already maxed out at 75, so you can't build that? Or could you say, maybe you can build it if the planning commission approves the extra 1,000 feet?
The way the government code is written, it's purely administrative. There's no discretionary approval to it. So the only way, there's not necessarily a mechanism in it. There is a very, very narrow mechanism for it to have to go to the planning commission. But the way the state has put ADU laws out, it's purely administrative, purely like you'll look at just the basics of it. It meets the code requirement for the square footage limits for what it is. It meets its setback requirements and its height requirements, and that's what we have to allow.
can you do it if someone came in with a new house and an ADU? Can you include the ADU and the 7,500 at that point and shrink the house rather than eliminate the ADU?
There is potential to look at everything as it is brand new, to look at it as brand new. But it just gets very tough because it's like purely administrative. Even at like new house going through the process with an ADU, the ADU gets looked at and it is still like, it just gets put on hold while the rest of the project goes through the review and approval process and gets approved, and then the ADU gets approved as just an administrative action to it.
So it's just kind of sacred and just sits there waiting for everything else to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the real world of things, with the amount of lots we have, and what's the likelihood of the situation where we'd have all these people building ADUs? I mean, how many have we had in the city, Rafferty, would you say, in the last couple of years? 6, 7, maybe?
No, we've had more than that. We might be closer to like the 15, almost
15.
20.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it'll become more and more common.
Yeah. So, Mr. Brooks, in order to keep moving this along in this flow chart, would you be more comfortable if, like in box D2, it says its primary structure floor is 6,500 feet or greater? If it's yes, it goes right to a standards modification. Is there a number you have in mind that would alleviate your concerns? And I'm kind of sorry you got stuck in this traffic, because now I think that's having a little bit something to do with how you're feeling because of the traffic, and I see what they're building on Whittier Boulevard, all 3 stories. So what kind of compromise can we do here?
Yeah, and just to be clear, so the way it currently is written is if the primary structure is less than 7,500 square feet, then that's administrative, right? So that's the administrative side of things. If it's 7,501 square foot, then that would require planning commission approval. So that's the way it's currently written. Then also, if there isn't a new ADU, you start back at the start box, right? Because that's a new structure, and so if it was over 1,000 square feet, it would require a standards modification that's administrative as well.
Well, no
Did you
one
just
would-
say an ADU?
Huh?
Did you just say an ADU?
Yeah, so if you look at,
no one's going to build a 1,000 square foot ADU because the limit's 800.
No, you can build 1,000,
You can
or was
build
it
1,000.
1,050?
Our maximum, so the state allows for up to 1,200 square feet for ADUs, and we have capped it at 1,000, which is sort of the max we can do if it's 2 bedrooms. So your studio, 1 bedroom, 800, 850, depending on if you're a straight building permit only or an ADU permit. If you're straight building permit, no theoretical planning review and approval, it's 800 square feet. If it's 850 square feet, you have an ADU permit, which is basically planning approval for it. And then if it's 2 bedrooms, you can have up to 1,000 square feet.
Or you can squeeze 3 bedrooms in.
Yeah.
so I guess the question is, if we're concerned about ADUs, then we're proposing to decrease or increase the size that we require the standards modification, right? So we're saying instead of 750, we're increasing to 1,000. That would require standards modification, right?
Or would it be to lower staff's approval? So instead of staff being able to approve up to 7,500 square foot, staff is only able to approve 6,000. And then anything above 6,000 square feet would automatically push you to planning commission approval, planning commission review and approval. So it would lower the threshold for what new home wise, we're talking brand new build, new house, that would be reviewable and approvable at a staff level. Like, so a lot of times people will work those limits to stay under the way our standards mod is written today. There's, a staff level and a planning commission level to work it to stay at an administrative level and not go into the planning commission level. If you cap that square footage at something lower, 4,000 square feet or something like that, that would be a much lower bar that staff would be able to approve, a much lower limit. Anything above that would then require planning commission approval and not just purely administrative staff review and approval.
I mean, just looking at the last 26 homes, if you look at living square footage, under 4,000 square feet, it's 3 or 4. So if you set it low, most of these would require planning commission approval.
So 6,000, I think, is reasonable. And I feel like if we went to box D2 and said, is the primary structure less than 6,000, then it just moves on to the aggregate. And if it's over 6,000, then it goes to the planning commission. And I would feel much better about that.
Okay, so pretty much for the primary structure floor area, then there would be no standards modification, that's city staff, right? Because you're setting a limit at 6,000 square feet that would trigger something, and we're just saying anything above it goes to planning commission.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's just for review. We don't have to drag it out. We don't have to, you know, we don't have to try to massage every little detail in it. But you know, if it's reviewed, then we look at all of the concerns.
So I make sure I understand, then you're suggesting removing any kind of discretionary variance or standards mod on behalf of the staff?
Over a certain square footage, yes.
For primary structure floor area.
For primary structure floor area. If we just cut out box D3 and had from D2 go down to the standards modification, but is not administrative, it would be planning commission, then that kind of solves most of my concerns and keeps it simple, and we don't have to try to add in the ADUs and making that living space, although I still feel like it is. You know, we just approved 1730 Canola with an ADU, but that ADU really didn't have any effect on the neighbors, right? Because that one neighbor was quite a ways away from there, and the neighbor down the hill who had an issue with the whole project, it wasn't up against their property line, you know, where their house is. So anyway, like I said, I'd like to see this move forward. I do think that it should get, you know, easier to build, and we're going from what was 1,500 square feet to basically, you know, 5,000 to 6,000, if I'm interpreting this correct, right?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how it affects the other boxes. If we go D2 to 6, is it over 6,000 square feet? Yes, then the box D3, that would have to change also, right?
Well, box
Lower that.
D3 just goes away, and so does box D4, because it doesn't matter, because it's over that, it automatically goes to planning commission. Or we could leave box 4, because if it's over 12,000 square feet, then it's going to need a variance.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Ms. Hess, what's your take on all of this?
That's fine with me. I mean, I don't want to rehash the reasons why that we've already discussed at the last meetings about why we think it's a good idea to let people build more on their properties.
Is your microphone on?
Sorry, it is, but I don't think it's very close to me. I was in support of this at our last meeting, where we talked extensively about why people should be able to build bigger houses on their lots, given the fact that we're kind of restrictive in terms of what people can build here. But I'm certainly willing to compromise as far as taking some of the discretion away from staff and just putting the discretion on us in order to achieve that goal. That's fine with me.
Okay. Mr. Blagden? All right, let me ask you first. Are you totally opposed to this right from the get-go? So,
Well, the one
talking
that
to you
we
about
had
it,
in the packet, I had a couple little things, but I was mostly okay with it. This one here, what should I start with? So there's no limits on the accessory square footage.
Well, you'd still have it, you know, it goes down to the aggregate structural footprint, right? So that's based on the total buildings on the property.
Yeah, see, my problem, and beyond this, which I've mentioned for several years, It goes back to SB 9, where people can split the lot, 2 houses, 2 separate saleable parcels, but they're only limited to 800 square feet on the SB 9 lots. But if you already have an existing building on what's going to be the second lot, it can be basically any size. So if someone has a garage, and correct me if I'm wrong on anything, Rafferty, if someone has a garage that's 3,000 square feet, they can split that off on the new lot and turn it into a house. And so my concern is these new accessory structures, you can look at them basically as a future house, and they won't be meeting the setbacks because you can have them 20 feet from the existing house, which will make for a 10-foot setback when it's split. So when someone builds like an accessory building, calling it a garage or a stable, you just in the back of your mind think, okay, are we looking at a future house? SB 9 lot split. So I think there needs to be more control over the accessory structures.
Can I answer that before you go into another? Okay, you bring up I'm a very kind of realistic type of guy, okay? I probably have the most garages in this city, or one of them. I have 2 3-car garages with a lift. I can park 7 cars. That's probably 1,200 square feet. I don't know anybody in this city that's got a 3,000 square foot garage. Now, we did have an applicant, Mr. Steven
Rajek?
Rajic. His name escaped me that second, but he's way out of the norm. He's a car collector.
Well, there's 2 of them on the CDD report this month. People looking for 3,000 square foot plus.
Yeah, but we're talking about, you said people that have a garage of 3,000 square foot, that they could convert it, but that would bring up a whole different issues, because you are required to have covered parking. So I don't think if you have a garage and you say, well, I want to turn it into an ADU, and you're going to eliminate some of your required parking, I don't think that's going to fly with the city. So I don't know, you always kind of bring up these
No, so I think
these
it's pretty
things that
realistic.
could happen, that the likelihood of it is kind of on the small side, I think.
Well, developers are pretty crafty, and they find the loopholes, and that's a huge loophole.
Well, I think
Well,
the
I
state
was
has found loopholes for them with the ADU ordinance.
Just looking forward, I think it's helpful or useful to consider large accessory structures might become separate houses.
Okay,
Is that
so
something
do
we're
you
okay
have
with, or is that something?
so do you have some suggested language that large accessory structures to remain accessory structures cannot be converted?
You couldn't
Living
do
space?
that.
I don't know, you
couldn't
can't do that.
No, you couldn't do
So
The thing that would have to be done is limit the size of the accessory structure.
and there is a limit, because you've got the,
Yeah, it's the remainder of the structural footprint. Yes,
Okay.
and I'm saying that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, it's for any, accessory.
So let's just take it as, use the 9,000. Someone could build 2 4,500 square footers, and then now you could have 2 4,500 square foot houses, and you'd still have the remainder available for a garage. You don't have to max out the 9,000 just on the house and then wonder what the accessory structure might be. You can take their total footprint limit and, work that around to what might be 2 accessory structures. I just think there should be some limit on accessory structures. All right, well, let me go on to other things. 1A, new covered structures. Maximum permitted structural footprint of any new covered structure. Think there it should say a covered primary structure, even though it's sort of implied, but just to make it clear. And then without an administrative standards modification.
Stephen, back up a second. So you think that instead of saying new covered structure, you want that changed to primary?
New covered primary structure, or new
Covered.
primary structure. And I think 5,000 square foot footprint just approved over the counter is way too much.
So even with a floor area square footage of 6,000 is now the limit. Okay, so again, looking at that not as a standalone, but now you have a floor area square footage that will limit that. So if someone wanted to build a single-story home, right? I think that's the intent of moving that up, because you're already covered in section 2 by the floor area. Because my concern was that if you kept it at 3,500, the garage is going to be 800 square feet. So basically you're saying, okay, well, you can build a 2,500 square foot home, a single story home, and people aren't going to build that, right? So that was kind of the intent of moving that up, because you're already protected on the floor area.
Well, then, what needs to be done, which we're also supposed to be doing, is reducing the limits for standards modifications for setbacks, and then maybe make the finding language a bit clearer, even for the administrative approvals, what they have to comply with. Because a 6,000 square foot house, these are all going to be redevelopments, not on new lots. So an existing house is going to go from 1,500 to 2,500 to 2,000, to 6,000. And, how is that going to impact the neighbors? And I just think,
Well, it still has to meet the setbacks. I mean, we're not changing setbacks.
well, we're supposed to be shrinking them. And
Yeah,
they-
but we're not. I mean, not in this proposal. And let's stay on point here. This is about,
Yeah, but I'm saying the council told us to work on setbacks as well as this.
well, then that can be a separate topic. But if we try to bite off more, it's just going to get so complex that nothing's ever going to happen. So let's deal with square footage, and then we can move on to, setbacks.
I wasn't aware that the council wants us to review setbacks. Is that a thing? Nobody's told me anything.
Yeah, they said it at the same meeting they approved us doing this.
Council's, some of the council members would like to look at everything again. Because we're working through it in pieces. Start here and then move on to the other parts and pieces. Because even if we approve the square footage change, it doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be a standards modification for height or setbacks or graded area or hardscaping. Like there's still other development standards that would have to meet those performance things.
Right.
So in the code 871840D on accessory structures, it says the maximum height for an accessory structure is 16 feet without a variance. And then down in number 4, no other improvements or structures other than primary may exceed 16 feet. That was clearly made twice in the body of the code. Accessory structure, 16 feet or needs a variance. But then when you go to table 12 in section 719, it allows 20-foot staff approval to 20 feet and planning commission approval to 24 feet. So there's an internal conflict there in the code.
What?
What does that have to do with square footage, Stephen?
Well, if you have, if you
It
can,
doesn't.
Yeah, it
okay?
does.
We
It
could
does.
deal with those other issues at a separate time.
if you can take an accessory structure to 24 feet, then it can have a second story.
Okay.
24 feet, I kind of doubt, well, we're counting roofs, but we're not even talking about that. What, like you said, Mr. Brooks says, let's concentrate on the issue at hand. We could get sidetracked and just keep going on what ifs.
And
till
then, just
midnight
going
here.
back to the definition of a floor area. This one says floor area means total living floor area of the primary structure measured in accordance with the city's applicable development standards, which doesn't tell you anything, which is why I made the definition here, which combined some definitions the city already has. The total gross floor area, the total square footage of a structure measured from the exterior of the building walls, inclusive of all floors, and includes enclosed second-level areas open to the level below. That's a definition you can actually follow.
And I agree with that. You know, I could see adding that to the definition to make it clear.
Okay. Anything else?
I guess I'm not going anywhere with the numbers are too high.
Okay.
So I'll,
Well, question, Commissioner Blandon. So for the floor area, is that living floor area, or does that include the garage?
it's for the residential structure. Yeah, well, actually, that's another, why I asked that question about the square footage for all structures.
Which falls under the aggregate structural limit, right?
But there is none, is there? Oh, wait a second, no, I think you'd added that.
Yeah, it's been in there. It was in Vice Chair Hess's one.
Yeah, with the primary structure floor area. Oh, but no, that doesn't include, there's no aggregate structure floor area. So let's say someone has their house and they put a garage next to it, and then they put a second level on the garage. Let's say they call it for storage. That doesn't count as square footage,
Correct.
but it is, and what this all is about is the visual impact on the neighbors and community. So it's kind of like a freebie. You're getting the square footage, but it doesn't count on anything.
Yeah, but if the limit's 16 feet without a modification, then that's where you could address that issue, right?
Yes, then that's one of the reasons I brought that up.
Okay. I have a, are you finished? I have a comment. Mr. Lucas, on 2A, it says on the third line, it says the maximum permitted floor area of a primary structure. And then on the next line, it says the maximum allowable square footage. Aren't those basically interchangeable terms? You call it floor area
Yeah,
and
you're
square
right.
footage. It's
You're
the
right.
same thing. So shouldn't we say that second line should say the maximum allowable floor area shall not exceed the limits identified? I'm just curious why you
You're
use
right.
the two terms.
No, that's a miss. Yeah, that's right. Should
Okay,
be floor
so
area.
we can change the maximum allowable floor area. Okay, so
So sorry to, I think that it should be defined that it's measured from the exterior walls, because floor area would be interior walls, which is a lot harder to define and measure.
yeah, well, that's pretty standard.
Yeah, my definition
footage.
has it from the,
It's
No,
from
I
exterior
understand. That's
walls,
why I
yeah.
said I agree with it. And if we're going to take out one of the other terms, I think floor area is the one that should go to.
Right.
And square footage should stay in, because the exterior walls is included in the square footage,
Right.
but it's not included as floor area.
So are you saying then that line third, it should say the maximum permitted square footage of a primary structure shall be And then the second paragraph, also the maximum square footage. Because it's an industry-wide, square footage is figured on the outside walls. Because those outside walls and interior walls actually take up a lot of square footage. You'd be surprised how much. So, and I've never really, floor area, you're interpreting to say, well, we measure the inside, the living room, and that's, might be confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should stay with 1 square.
So keep
What-
it standard with square footage.
Yeah, what do you think of that, Mr. Lucas?
Okay, so which one are we looking at?
On 2A, the third line, or the second line at the end, the maximum permitted floor area, that should be the maximum permitted square footage of a primary structure shall be 6,000. Well, now it's going to be 6,000, right? Square feet, and then the maximum allowable square footage, that would stay. So we're using, I'm also trying to not use too many different terms for similar things to keep it, simple. So I'm basically okay with, with this, with the change you suggest. So,
So then for that whole section, are we changing floor area to square footage? So is it primary structure square footage?
you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just, instead of calling it floor area, we'll call it square footage. But you don't have a definition here, Mr. Blagden, of square footage. But that's a universally understood term. I don't think people, when you get an appraisal on your house, the square footage is measured on the outside. I don't think there's any room for doubt on that particular one.
Well, it's kind of in the definition for gross floor area. It's the total square footage.
Measured from the outside walls.
Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of floor area and square footage is kind of interchangeable term, but I'd rather just keep one.
Okay, so back to my previous question. Again, based on this potentially revised 6,000 square foot number, originally that did not include the garage. That was living space, not square footage, right? Because if you say square footage, in this case, would that include the garage typically? If you're saying primary structure square footage, I think we need to be clear of whether or not it includes the garage or not, right?
No, when you look at the county website, it says a house is 4,000 square feet. That's the living area.
Yeah, okay,
It does not include the garage.
okay. So we're
Even if
using
it's
that
an
definition.
attached garage, or there's a second-story living space above the garage, the living space above the garage is counted, but not the garage itself.
Okay.
So it's living space.
Do we need just to clarify that so in 5 years, someone doesn't ask, well, does this include living or not?
It'd be nice to add a line. I've built hundreds of homes, and the square footage of a house was always the house, the conditioned space,
Yeah.
you would say. Because like you go to Phoenix and other areas that have extensive patios, that outside, it could impact the structural footprint, but it's not living space. And this is the first city I've ever worked in that when they put the square footage of a house on an application, that includes the garage. So we've had a situation, and our city manager may recall, and I know Mr. Blagden will recall, that property up around the 900 block of Picacho, the one that they wanted to build a big house.
Oh, yeah, 849.
Thank you for that. I remember people up in arms, they're building an 11,000 square foot home. But no, remember the guy had a big garage because he had a car collection or something. He had, on the lower level underneath, he had a big garage, but people saying he was building an 11,000 square foot.
Oh, yeah, I would encourage people to build subterranean garages.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that does get back to what I was saying about what we're looking at is the impact of the community. And so it's the visual of the structure, which includes the garage. So subtracting the garage doesn't mean there's less there. It's a different number.
Well, I understand. Okay, so do you have enough information, Mr. Lucas, to make the necessary changes? We could modify it right now because it's basically the 6,000 square feet. Add a paragraph to say that living space or is
Conditioned space.
conditioned space, not garages.
Yep.
It'd be easy enough to add a line to that.
Well, I wouldn't mind if it came back because I'd like to look at this and think about it. I mean, because I spent over 3 days, not every day, the whole day looking at it, but look at it, think about it, the implications, look at it again, something else might come up to mind.
Okay,
Unless we
well,
just
let me ask you this. Is there any possibility in this world that you would ever vote for this? Because I'm not going to delay this a month so you could think about it and still not vote for it. And I want you to do what your heart says.
No, okay,
I'm
well, it's not what my
putting
heart
any
says, it's
pressure, but
what's-
why delay this another month?
Yeah,
We-
okay,
we've
yeah,
been at this
that's
since
fair,
May.
that's fair. No, it's not what I personally think, it's what
So-
complies with the general plan. And yeah, no, I, regardless of how much it's massaged, if it's still getting a 5,000 square foot footprint without a stands modification, that's too big. So yeah, no, it wouldn't
Okay.
matter.
And Mr. Blagden, if we approve this tonight to go to city council, you obviously aren't shy about talking to city council, and if there are any modifications, I'm sure that you could stand up before city council and say, you know, I think you should approve this with these modifications, and we can keep the whole process moving forward. Is that reasonable?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
That's fair enough. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion. Probably Mr. Lucas, since you're most familiar with your,
All right, I'd like to propose to move forward the proposed language of City Council for Section 718040A with the following revisions. So Section 1A, adding the word primary, so it would read, the maximum permitted structural footprint of any new covered primary structure. For Section A2, primary structure floor area, we will replace where it says floor area with square footage, I guess throughout that section and any other part of the document, you know, where it's applicable.
okay,
For, let's see, for section, again, Section 2, primary structure floor area, for Section A, we'll revise the 6,500 square foot number down to 6,000. And anything above 6,000 would go to Planning Commission for approval. It would not be an administrative type of approval. Then the last thing I believe was for the definition of, I guess, square footage. We would use Commissioner Blindon's definition and include that it's only applicable to conditioned space or living space or something of that nature. And I think that covered most that we talked about.
okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. Mr. Blagden?
I know.
Ms. Hess?
Yes.
Mr. Brooks?
Yes.
Mr. Lucas?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, so passes on a 4-to-1 vote. And Mr. Lucas, can I ask, you know, staff's pretty busy, can you make those changes and in
Yes.
your flow chart and forward them to our city manager, please?
Yep, we'll do.
Okay, thank you for that. What did I do? Okay, so that's the end of administrative items. Christina, no public comments. All right, staff comments.
Thank you all for the help and the work on this one. I will take it to the September council meeting, which is on September 14th. If they are good and give us the okay, we would have to publish a hearing notice, which, due to the way the month breaks, wouldn't be able to be ready for September. It would probably be October for public hearing, which would be October 28th at the soonest for being able to get council to review it, get the okay, and time to place the hearing notice in the newspaper. It would make it like October meeting for formal public hearing recommendation to council to review and approve would be probably timeline wise looking at it right now. But yeah, that's all. We do have quarterly cleanup coming up in October 17th. If anybody's interested, we've had a few people call in with things related to household hazardous waste. Typically have those in July. We're working with the county to maybe have a second one. They lost a location in La Puente. So we may be trying to book 2 in the future for us with the county for household hazardous waste. But the big question is paint. A lot of people do have questions about paint. You can contact the paint suppliers like the Sherwin-Williams right here on Whittier and Hacienda will take it if you call and make sure they have room available and the containers are sealed and not rusted and leaking. They will take the paint. We do get a lot of people with extra paint that call, so an extra resource for residents.
Just a clarification. So this square foot code amendment would come up to the council meeting September 14th. It'd be on their agenda. And then October 28th would be a public hearing. Would that also count as the first reading of the amendment? That's another meeting.
That's another meeting. So when it goes through the process for code amendments related to zoning code, first the Planning Commission has to hold a public hearing and make a formal recommendation to the City Council. Then the City Council will, at their meeting, hold a first reading. The next month, a second reading. And then there's a 30-day period, sort of like a cooling off period, and then it goes into the code and becomes effective after that 30-day period. So sort of the public hearing process is like 3 meetings. So 1 at Planning Commission, 2 at Council, and then a 30-day cooling off period before it is in the code. So really it would be first reading, Planning Commission's recommendation would be October, so it would be November would be the first reading at City Council. Yes, we should have time to put it in the newspaper. First reading in November, second reading December, and then theoretically January would be when it would go into the code.
Long process, huh?
It's a long process and about, anywhere from $900 to $1,200 in public hearing notices.
Okay.
Now, do you have to put it in both the Whittier Daily News and the San Gabriel Valley News?
Just with your daily news. Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner comments. I'll start with Mr. Blagden.
Yeah, since we were talking about table 7-12, a couple of things that are there in 711 setbacks. The last one, footprint related, exhibit 7-5. It has the administrative and planning commission. And then under 718, building design standards, large structure also has administrative and planning commission. The thing is, though, exhibit 7-5 was eliminated in 2012, so those shouldn't even be there. That'd be good to clean up at some time. But that was a result of, you want to do a good job when you make the code recommendations in which Jim did. He got the table 7-12 changes in there. But you don't want to do it quick and sloppily, so you leave in remnants that don't even mean anything. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Just wondering at what point in the process of making a proposed code amendment did we run this by the city attorney?
Usually at this point, when we're kind of narrowed down final code language, we'll run it through their office.
Mr. Brooks?
None for me, thanks.
Mr. Lucas?
Nothing here.
I just want to say I want to thank all of you. I feel very fortunate to work with all of you. You're all very bright people. I couldn't have done that flow chart and everything. I've never learned how to do that. Maybe it's a generational thing. You younger people know how to do all that great computer stuff, but I'm very good at other things. So I appreciate your time, and I know I'm putting you through a little bit of work, right? I mean, I could just sit here and just kind of go along to get along, but that's not in my DNA. So I thank you for your efforts on this, and everything I'm doing is try to make for a better city. I feel real bad. I just don't see, I've been here 23 years and I don't see any growth, any real big progress. And I love this city, the rural environment and everything, and I just want to, see it better, give people a little opportunity. One of the main reasons for this is to maybe kind of lure some people to come in and say, hey, maybe I can build, a nice home in the Heights. Maybe get a little competition going, bring property values up. But when there's a lot for sale and there might only be one taker, the lot around my house, 5 acres, it was on the market for over 20 years, just to give you an idea. And somebody finally bought it, and I think they're probably regretting it right about now. So anyway, thank you, and with that, meeting adjourned.